This video was sponsored by no one, but you can show your support by joining my Patreon or clicking that little thanks button under the video. Thank you. Here's everything I'm planning to read in April. As always, it'll be interesting to see how well I stick to this list. I love planning out my month, I love seeing the stack of 10, 15 books that I hope to get through, and I also kind of giggle whenever I pull a book out and go, nah, I'm actually not going to read that this month, and swap it out for something else that I've just bought or whatever. I'm actually planning on going to buy a book later today. There's a book I want, I'm gonna get it. It won't be on this list, but I'll probably read it this month, so this is already out the window, at least a tiny little bit. Anyway, here's everything I want to read in April. As always, I haven't read any of these books yet, so we're either going off what I've heard or I'll read the blurb. And we'll start with a few review copies that I've received, books that just came out in March or are coming out in April, and I'm hoping to review them. This is Delicate Condition by Danielle Valentine. One hell of a name. This was sent to me by Viper Press. I actually have another Viper book on this list that I'll get to in a bit. And this is a thriller with a kind of a horror twist. And from what I've read about it, Delicate Condition is kind of a more overtly feminist Rosemary's Baby. Now, I love the film Rosemary's Baby. I haven't read the book by Ira Levin. I think it's Ira Levin. I keep meaning to read it. It's really short. I saw it in the library the other day and I almost picked it up. Maybe that should go on this list. Anyway, the film Rosemary's Baby is really great. And Delicate Condition is supposed to be that for the 21st century, but as I said, more aggressively feminist. Now, I have a phobia of pregnancy. This isn't something I think I've talked about before on this channel. I don't know, maybe I have. I think it's called tocophobia, whatever it is. Fear of pregnancy. Which is kind of ironic given that I'm a trans woman. The fact that I take hormones in order to grow boobies and bigger hips and thicker hair, etc. And yet I hate pregnancy. I don't ever want to have children of my own. I'm not very good around children. And yeah, I used to be a teacher, but I was a high school teacher. I'm not good around the little kids. And I freak out a little bit when I'm around pregnant people. I don't like pregnancy. It's icky to me. I'm sorry if that annoys anyone, but I'm just not good around pregnancy. And this whole book is about pregnancy, so let's see how we go. God, I just realized how that sounded. I'm trans, I spend time and money feminizing myself, therefore I should want to have kids. That is so patriarchal. That is so women are nothing but baby-making machines. If it came across that way, I am so sorry. You really have to be careful with YouTube. You say things and then you realize and then you sound like an asshole and I don't even know how to fix that. There is an undeniable irony with hating pregnancy but wanting to be more feminine. But that doesn't mean, you get it. I'm not an asshole, right? Fuck me, maybe I am. Anyway, there's a new Eric LaRocca book out this month. I love Eric, he's one of my favourite horror writers. He actually made sure I got this copy, and so Eric, if you're watching this, thank you so much, I love you. Eric, in my opinion, is on top form when he's writing short stories, and this is a new collection. This skin was once mine. I really cannot overemphasize how much I think Eric LaRocca is the best horror writer working today. There are so many great, young, up-and-coming, newly published horror writers out there, especially from the UK, the US, Argentina, Japan, actually quite a few places. Horror is doing really well right now, especially from the queer perspective. So much great queer horror. Queer people write good horror, and I love that. Eric LaRocca is a queer person who writes really, really good horror. They are my best, I love them so much. I haven't read this yet, but it does come out very, very soon, so one of the books on this list I've already started, which I'll talk about in just a second. So I'll read that first, then I'll read this and I'll review it, blah, blah, blah. Review is coming soon. I don't know anything about it as of yet, because I haven't started it. But if there's one thing I love about Eric, it is their titles. This Skin Was Once Mine, bleh. And instead of being called And Other Stories, it's called And Other Disturbances, and I can't wait to be disturbed. This was a wonderful surprise that dropped through my letterbox the other day. Yesterday, maybe. The Secret Life of Insects by Bernardo Esquinca is a short story collection by New Ruins. New Ruins is a UK-based publishing house that's actually a combination of Influx Press and Dead Ink Books. I believe New Ruins published Jawbone by Monica Ojeda, which was an incredible novel that I really, really adored. I've had a lot of people thank me for my recommendation of Jawbone, so if you haven't read it yet, that's a real good book. This book is translated from the Spanish by James D. Jenkins. Bernardo Esquinca is a Mexican author, and this is a collection of weird short stories. they sound kind of creepy from the blurb, but they also deal with Mexico's history. It talks about the Aztecs, it talks about the conquistadors, and it talks about modern-day Mexico. There is also an introduction by Mariana Enriquez, one of my favorite authors of all time. I talk about her a lot. Mariana Enriquez is incredible. If she's written an intro to this, it must be a fantastic book. This is Some Strange Music Draws Me In by Griffin Hansberry. Daunt Books asked me if I wanted this, and I said yes. I hadn't heard of it before, but it is a trans book. It's set in a small town in Massachusetts in the 1980s, and from what the blurb tells me, it begins with a young girl who realizes he's a trans guy because he's inspired by a local trans woman that he hears about on the radio. The blurb is a little complex to read, so I think I've got that right. Anyway, I really like books that are set in suburbia because they're often defined by complex character relationships and dynamics, and this is a trans identity story set in the 80s, featuring a trans man and a trans woman as protagonists. And I've read a lot of books by trans writers about being trans, but quite often they're trans men writing trans men and trans women writing trans women. Here you've got both, at least according to the blurb. So, well, I should probably stop guessing. I haven't read it yet, but I'm intrigued. I'm planning to read and review this month. Let's see how that goes. I mentioned before that there's a book on this list that I've just started, and that book is this. Alien Clay by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Whenever I talk about science fiction on this channel, I mention the fact that Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky is my favorite sci-fi novel ever. I love Children of Time. I've actually met Tchaikovsky about 18 months ago now at a Comic-Con in London. He is the nicest guy. He is the sweetest man I have ever met in my life. He is such a sweetheart, I cannot overstate that. And I love his science fiction. And I was in a bookshop the other day and I saw that I couldn't resist it. I could not pick this up. And then I went home with this book and I bought tickets to go see him at an event. He's coming to Glasgow in like 2 weeks and I'm going to go see him. I'm so excited to read this. This is a standalone sci-fi book and I will always pick up a standalone. Like I said, Children of Time is my favorite sci-fi book, but I've actually never read its sequels. It is the first in a trilogy. But when it was published, it really felt like a standalone. And then 2 more came out. I haven't got to them yet, but this one is a standalone, so I know I can just enjoy this one thing. The older I get, the more I just don't have the staying power for a long series, or even a trilogy sometimes. But Alien Clay, big epic sci-fi by my favorite sci-fi writer, yeah, absolutely. I'm reading this right now, so this will be the first book that I talk about in April probably. And this is A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. I was so hyped for this. I went out and got it the day it came out. This is a gruesome piece of historical fiction that is very, very Frankenstein inspired. It's gay, it's gothic, it is everything I love in a piece of fiction. I'm quite a big Frankenstein fan, and so anything to do with Frankenstein, anything inspired by it, anything that sounds vaguely like Frankenstein, I'm going to read it. Especially if it's gay, historical, gothic fiction. Absolutely yes. I can't wait to read and talk a lot about A Botanical Daughter. Great name. This will surely be fantastic. Here's a book that I picked up on a whim, kind of. I was chatting with my friend Molly, editor of the fantastic feminist anthology Peach Pit, and she told me I need to go out and read this book. I hadn't heard of it, but I felt like a puppet on strings. She was like, go read The Night Alphabet, you'll love it. So I just did. Suddenly it was in my hands. This is by Joelle Taylor, who wrote the poetry collection Canto, which I've got around here somewhere. Canto is a complex collection of poetry, and Joelle Taylor is a very prolific lesbian poet who writes about being queer and being working class. And she's been writing poetry for decades, and The Night Alphabet is her first novel. It's kind of a piece of science fiction, and it's about a woman who goes into a tattoo shop. She's almost completely covered in tattoos, and she has these 2 artists in mind to work on a final piece for her. And these 2 artists somehow factor into the story specifically. And as she's getting tattooed by them, she starts recounting the stories connected to all of her tattoos. As someone with a lot of tattoos, I was immediately intrigued. But according to the blurb, each of these tattoos acts as a kind of short story, a window into a different life. And so we jump through time and space, and there's the kind of sci-fi element. That's all I know, because I haven't read it yet. I have a feeling I'm gonna love it though. Here's a book that I've had on my radar for ages, and yet I still don't know anything about it. I keep reading the blurb and then forgetting what it says. This is The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. It is a science fiction novel that people really, really adore. It's only a few years old at this point, and I've stared at it so many times in bookshops and libraries and told myself I really need to read this. People adore it. My patrons have talked about it on my Patreon Discord. This is a really beloved sci-fi book. It seems like quite a touching epic, and from the way people describe it, it feels like it has a lot of heart, a lot of humanity, and since I am very much in my sci-fi era right now, I'm thrilled. I'm so happy I finally have a copy of this, and I'll be reading it this month for sure. This is the other book that Viper Press sent me a copy of, so thank you very much to you guys, you're amazing. This is The Under History by Karen Warren, and the hardcover is absolutely stunning. Based on the blurb, this feels like a very unique kind of gothic novel. It centers around a young woman who is the sole survivor of her house when a plane intentionally crashes into it, killing the rest of her family. According to the blurb, from that moment she decides to rebuild her house, with each room kind of being dedicated to a member of her family. And she also claims that this new, freshly built house of hers is haunted, and so she gives ghost tours, until a group of dangerous men come to join this tour and have a look around the house, and they must be after something. It sounds really weird. As gothic stories go, this really bucks the trend in some very obvious ways. So I'm very excited to check this out. I don't think it's going to be a typical gothic story at all. And finally, here's the book I told myself I'd read last month, but I didn't. This is Immortality, a Love Story by Dana Schwartz. It's the sequel to Anatomy, a Love Story, a book that I really, really adored. I think I read it like a year ago now. And Immortality sounds great. A worthy sequel, I'm sure. I just keep not reading it. I'll get to it. Every time I do one of these videos, there's usually a book from the previous month that I didn't get to, and I'm kind of annoyed at myself for that, and this is that. Let's see if I read this in April, or if it turns up on the stack for May as well. If it does, I'll do nothing. I'll just read it when I get to it. There you go. The sun's just come out, so I'm gonna go for a walk. I'm gonna get some bubble tea. Subscribe for books.